Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. Welcome back to another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. And so as always, we begin with lighting a candle, the village fire, calling in our whole selves, calling in our ancestors, our guides, our community, our people, calling in the land, calling in our beyond human kin, calling in counsel. And as we do that, as we open ourselves to call them all in around this fire, we feel how we're connected. We feel how the decisions that we make affect the whole web of life. We feel that meeting point of spirit and of human and of beyond human, of the material world and the subtle world. We feel how we matter, how our choices matter, and we feel how we belong. And so we say thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Notice if even just in acknowledging that, whether your body, mind naturally took a deeper breath in and out, right? And so oftentimes that sort of unconscious breathing pattern change points to a nervous system shift. And so something just shifted in my nervous system, something downregulated in calling in counsel and feeling my sense of belonging. And so I offer you that awareness in case that lands for you. So today I have Kristin with me, and Kristin is the first person I've had on the podcast who was brought to me through the podcast. So this is this beautiful like web of things spreading and then calling in and relationships building. And so that feels very special to name. And as we began learning more about each other and feeling into possible conversations to bring to this fire, one of the themes that kept coming up that felt really vital and present was like this idea of not falling through the cracks. And it's something Kristin is really passionate about, and you can feel that in just like the deep care of her presence and in the deep joy she brings to connecting with other people and hearing their stories and inviting them to share. She was really drawn to like the spaciousness of the podcast episode too, and how it takes time. And I let the conversations kind of take time and operate at a slower pace. And so, yeah, so it feels like there's kind of these beautiful themes that, that I think are going to come out in our conversation today. But really, I think a lot of what both of us are really about is like what we as humans are yearning for somewhere deep or even not so deep inside. And I think we've both been on those journeys personally and then also like professionally of like inviting other people to find that out for themselves. And so, yeah, so I'm really excited to have Kristin. And so she is a highly experienced, here's her bio, a highly experienced professional certified coach, spiritual psychology and somatic touch practitioner, and yoga and meditation teacher with 20 plus years of study in the fields of psychology, spiritual psychology, and education. Kristin's specialty is holding sacred space for people to heal deep-rooted patterns held in the body and at the emotional level. She works with people using a soul-centered approach, incorporating the mind, body, and emotions, and has found this multidimensional approach to be most effective in serving long-term healing and growth. People who work with Kristin often experience deep shifts in their consciousness, resulting in freedom from limiting patterns and beliefs, increased nervous system regulation, more loving and meaningful relationships, greater ability to use their gifts and talents in the world, and even freedom from intergenerational patterns. Kristin holds a master's in spiritual science and assists the advanced spiritual psychology programs at the University of Santa Monica, where she trained for 4 years. And she's also taught children for 17 years and is trauma informed. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. That was such a powerful opening. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's lovely to have you here. And yeah, so as you know, I begin each episode, I like to invite. Invite's the nicer word, the more spacious word, it feels like. I like to invite you to introduce yourself, less in the sort of professional bio capacity and kind of more in like, what do you want people to know about you? Or like, how would people weave you into the social fabric of things?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that question. It takes us outside of the box of what we're quote unquote supposed to be,
Mhm.
and places us into a more organic and authentic space. And so I think for me, well, I'm born and raised in the United States. I've lived a lot of different places, both within the United States, outside of the United States. Um, and I think what I've found as I've kind of gotten older is that I feel a lot of resonance with a lot of different places,
Mm.
and kind of this concept of being, being of the world, like being a citizen of the world.
Mm.
And I think for me, there's a constant and consistent like aligning to um, this we were talking about before, animism. So this idea of, how we're all have an inner essence,
Mm.
an inner kind of spirit, soul, whatever that is. However we relate to that life force energy, every modality talks about it differently, but it's ultimately that inner kind of life force energy. And for me, I noticed that I'm constantly in a state of aligning to it and like realigning to it, and
Mm.
noticing the things that, or the experiences or activities or conversations or relationships that help bring me into it. Um, and then noticing, if I come out of it, how can I bring that space to everything that I do? Um, so that's kind of what comes forward for me with
Mhm.
that question, because there's a constant kind of inner attunement to how can I be more in alignment with and more in balance with that like inner life force that's wanting to move through me, and what's the highest way that I can attune to it, and that it can like express itself,
Mm.
is how I think of it,
Mm.
or experience it rather.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so I love that distinction you drew right there between like the thinking and the experiencing, and particularly I feel like sort of with the background, I think a lot of Western psychology is very much more how we think about things and how we perceive things like through the mind and kind of through the upper body senses, as opposed to kind of through the gut and the heart and the soma, the
Yeah.
skin. um And so I don't know, maybe that's sort of, there's a couple threads that I'm sort of tracking sort of based off what you just shared, but maybe that's where we start actually. What do you feel like is kind of what has been your experience of the difference between when we think about something versus when we experience something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like we are in a huge collective shift. And I'm curious to get your perspective on this as well. But I really feel like we're in this massive collective shift where we're realizing and people are starting to acknowledge that we have a mind, we have an intellect, but we're so much more than that. And um, I always talk about we're multidimensional in consciousness. We have a mind, we have an emotional body, we have a physical body and a nervous system that holds a lot of our patterning. Um,
Mhm.
and then we have an energy body. And to me, we're being we're craving that shift from just knowing the world and ourselves and our experience and who we've been and what we want, like how we think about our futures, so to speak, from an intellectual, mental level. And there's this shift into no, we're so much more than that. And when we start to do all of these modalities or things that drop us into our bodies, um, whether that's through like I'm in pain right now and I have this pattern that just won't seem to let go and I need a different modality to help me do that, or whether that's through I just have a craving to like experience the world. Like there has to be more. So how can I experience myself in the world through more depth and more aliveness?
Mm.
I think we're in a huge collective shift from just
Mhm.
knowing ourselves as an intellect into knowing ourselves as so much more.
Mm. Mm.
And then I also think that as we unthaw all of the frozen parts of us or parts that we, whether, individually or collectively, that have been pushed away for so long, because maybe we didn't have the capacity as a collective to feel them or to acknowledge them. There's some challenge in allowing all of that to surface.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that whole I think it was Descartes, right, who said, "I think, therefore I am." Was that
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, it seems like at least for those of us of European descendancy, that and then through colonialism, like, that's kind of spread through the world, but as an organizing principle, that has really, I think, been foundational to our organizing principles for a really long time now, and and that was not the indigenous understanding, of who we are and how we know we are. Um, mind is tool rather than mind is master. And
Mm,
so it feels like
mhm,
part of this foundational shift that seems like that you're talking about, this sort of collective consciousness shift, is this invitation of like believing that thought is the pinnacle of who and how we are and should somehow be, I remember there was a moment back in college when I was really struggling. There were a couple years there where I had a lot of anxiety. I was really deeply disconnected from my body. I was never diagnosed with anything, but I suspect body dysmorphia would have been on the list of diagnoses had I gotten them. Depression certainly would have been there. Anxiety would have been there. And and I remember like laying in bed, just like crying myself to sleep one night. And my mind was just like, I knew the thoughts in my mind were poisonous, right? And I knew that they were hurting me, and I knew that they were hurting my ability to connect with other people, right? Like I knew that what they were telling me were lies, and they were like, I mean, paranoid lies, like, the kind of stuff like you should never talk to anybody, you should never hang out with anybody, nobody's going to like you, nobody's going to understand you, like everything you do, everything you touch like hurts people. So like you should just there was some small part of my brain that like knew that that wasn't true that was able to say like this is this is some bullshit. This is some racket and it's really not helpful. And because of these thoughts, you do end up hurting people and you do end up hurting yourself and you do end up pushing people away. And, so there was like some part of me that was able to be just distant enough, but I was still so identified with my thoughts that then it was like, I remember laying there and being like, I can tell my mind is sick. I can tell my mind is thinking poisonous thoughts,
Mhm.
but who am I if I'm not my mind? And like, how can I stop, and I really did at the time. I was so identified with my mind, and we are, I mean, that's how society conditions us to be,
Yeah.
um, And I felt so helpless and hopeless in that moment because it was just like, if my mind is the problem, then I don't even know where to begin, you
Yeah.
know? Because I didn't know that there was something else, you know? And then it's like slowly other ways started finding me,
Mhm.
and things that brought me more out of my head and into my body and gave me some sort of different, deeper anchor so that then I could actually question my thoughts without having it feel like an attack on my entire sense of who I was, right? Because I think, and so this feels like before we started recording, we were sort of talking about spaciousness. And so this is part of where it feels like spaciousness starts to weave its way in, right? It's like if we're so identified with something as being who we are,
Yeah.
then when we try to sort of open that definition up a little bit or try to question anything, it feels like so much scarier to question it because it feels so much more threatening because it's like, who am I if not my mind? And if
Mhm.
we have no sense of our body and we have no sense of the subtle self and we have no sense of like kinship with the beyond human world, then yeah, it gets really scary questioning our thoughts, right? Because like who are we without that? And yeah, so I guess yeah, what does that bring up anything for you or do you yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to that experience, especially because a lot of the modalities that have been common practice and even best practices, in my experience, have operated within this construct of like our mind,
Mm. Mhm.
and our thoughts create our reality, this type of thing. And um, going back to like not falling through the cracks, when I think about the modalities that ended up shifting it for me in my experience, they were not mental modalities.
Mhm.
They were really, things started shifting for me when I got into somatic work,
Yeah.
somatic touch, so the body, the nervous system,
Yeah.
and then spiritual psychology, the element of like knowing that we're inherently and innately whole, and that
Yeah.
we inherently and innately have access, or at least are a part of some organizing um life force, that even though it looks chaotic and can feel chaotic, feels chaotic, especially now, that there's organization on some level to it. Like we have gravity, that's an organizing force. The earth spins on its axis. Like we all have an inner essence. Um, and to me, it is terrifying when we're identified with maybe a way that our thought process, or a way that our nervous system has responded to an event that we experience as traumatic, and then we over identify with being a people pleaser, or being, however, whatever the painful thing is that we're identifying with. But I think what's so powerful is when now what people are experiencing is, oh, wow, there are modalities that can help us, that can assist us in knowing that we can change.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
like if I have a painful pattern or a misidentification, um, that's something that isn't who I am. It's a thought or it's a behavior or it's a pattern that's been locked into my nervous system because I just didn't know another way. But that when I have the right tools, um, that being like community,
Mhm. Mhm.
belonging, you know, this, we were talking about spaciousness, like the spaciousness inside of myself to even be with myself.
Mhm.
Um, I think about that, then people are much less likely to fall through the cracks when they have a system of care or opportunities of care, whether both socially and or professionally or however it works,
Mhm. Mhm.
like lifestyle wise, where falling through the cracks isn't an option
Mhm.
because I have the care that I need and there's nothing that's broken. It's my body's response to something that happened that I didn't have the resources for. And I think what we're being, just on this huge collective level, what we're being asked to do right now is to become more consciously aware of all of our experiences inwardly, individually, intergenerationally, collectively. And for those of us who have been on the path for a long time and who have been maybe like the canaries,
Mhm.
like like you've talked about, like I have
Mhm.
been, right? Like early on when I'm having these, intrusive thoughts, or for me, it was a lot of like really horrible anxiety and a lot of other things. It was like I was going to all of the modern modalities and doctors and healers, everything. I went to everything and nothing was working.
Mhm.
And so I think it's been those of us who are more of the sensitive canary types that are like, wait a second, this modern structure that are quote unquote best practices, it's not that it's not valuable. It's just, I think that there's more.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of what we're being asked to do is evolve. It's like using the structures that are already in place, but then evolving into like what what's even more effective
Mhm.
because we're doing big work.
Mm.
When we uncover and when we decide to work with a pattern in our consciousness, and then it's individual, just unique to us, or when we start to realize, oh, this is an intergenerational pattern that's run throughout my lineage, or this is a pattern that's also collective, um, that's big work.
Mm. Yeah. You've been talking about sort of evolving, and I'm sort of one of the things that I've been kind of teasing out in the last conversation that I had and kind of for myself recently, because I feel like it's sort of that healthy tension. There's a difference between unhealthy tension and healthy tension, but that healthy tension between the idea of evolution and progress, and then also like that there are some things that we've lost,
Mm.
old ways of knowing and relating and understanding the world, and like going back to sort of sift through some of those to find which ones might hold the key to then evolve, and like how can we bring these old ways forward into these modern times, and because a lot of what I think we're kind of dancing around here, with talking about the mind versus the body and sort of animism and community as a tool, and these modalities that weren't working, and why weren't they working, right? And like, or they work but only to a certain point, and then they seem to like reach kind of the end of their scope, right? And like, and I think I think a big piece of that is so many of the modalities that we're turning to are newer. They were actually created at moments of profound rupture, right? There was something in, and here I'm speaking mostly, I think, to those of us in white bodies of European descendancy, right, in our history. But before we were white, we were something else, right? We were, like I had ancestors who were Italian. I had ancestors who were Irish. I had ancestors who were German. I had ancestors who were Jewish. I had ancestors from all these places who, before they were white, were something else. And they were those identities, and they belonged to certain lands, and they had culture, and they had songs, and they had stories, and they had languages, right? And there are a lot of, and they had more indigenous, what we think of as indigenous ways of knowing and relating to that sense of kinship, to that sense of land, to that sense of belonging. And, I think much of what, Western medicine today, there's benefits to it. And it came about at the cost of the hedge witches down the road, the herbalists, the midwives, the witches, the shamans, right? And then the same kind of with Western psychology in a lot of ways too. Western psychology developed, and in doing so, something else was lost, right? And so in those moments when our ancestors experienced a rupture with land, a rupture with place, a rupture with language, a rupture with culture, these modalities that we've been turning to were developed after that rupture, right? But the rupture is in our bodies and is in our nervous systems and has been passed down generationally, And so it's like, for me, of course it makes sense that while those things absolutely have their time and place in modern society, that there are certain pains that we experience, certain patterns that we grapple with, that we can't heal through those modalities, because those modalities existed after the rupture, or perhaps even played a part in perpetuating the rupture. And so it's like we almost have to go back in some ways. And not because going back, everything was perfect back in the day, that's like a false narrative, but that there may be seeds of something, or roots of something that were lost, that if we can kind of remember them from where they still live within us, because just as the rupture exists still within us, so do the tools for repair, right? The tools for repair are there too. And so but we have to go to those places deep within and find both of those things, I think, to actually evolve forward in modern times. Yeah.
I completely agree. First of all, I love how connected you are to your lineage and to your ancestors. And I love
I'll say I'm working on it. That's a more recent effort to reclaim. But anyway, yeah.
No, I love what you're talking about, acknowledging the benefits of everything that's been created, and this deep craving and longing, even if we're not totally aware of it, for some of from knowing where we come from, knowing that we're a part of something bigger and larger, which I think sometimes that can happen through knowing our lineage and our ancestors and where they came from, and even what it's like we're standing in a lot of ways on the shoulders of our ancestors. And so just the acknowledgement of what their experiences were. And I'm curious for you, what are some of the keys that you see or feel when you think about the reclaiming and what people are craving?
I think a piece of that is wonder and mystery, right? I think we have more information, or more access to opinion and information than ever before. And yet we also feel a soul whole more than ever before. And so I think that's a piece of it. Spaciousness. Let me feel into that. It came up, but let me feel into that thread a little bit more. Well, again, I mean, I think we're overstimulated, actually, like collectively. Like there's we're addicted to screens, there's a lot of I've heard recently, I haven't really gone down this rabbit hole yet to really like feel into it and get it into my body and everything, but I've seen a couple people refer recently to social media as its own nervous system.
Mhm.
And it is a nervous system, and it's a different type of nervous system. And we are always, for those of us who are on social media, which is almost everybody in some capacity at this point, it's something we're attuning to constantly, and yet the people who designed it knew exactly what they were doing, and they designed it so that it would trigger the parts of us that keep coming back and keep our yearning for belonging. And yet you can't satisfy belonging, otherwise people like won't keep coming back in that same way. So there's like a twisted version of belonging that's happening there, right? And there's just sound everywhere. I mean, I just made my first reel the other day. For a long time I resisted, and in part because the idea of scrolling through a feed and having the sound constantly change, like, I mean, I have it on silent, so I don't even have that. I do captions only on social media. But it's like, I mean, what that does to our nervous systems is, I don't know, at least mine cannot handle that. And I strongly suspect most people's can't.
Yeah.
And just that, but we've become so used to like having the TV playing in this room, and then another TV on another station in this room, and then the radio over there, and then we're scrolling through our phone while all that's happening. And like somehow that's become normalized, right? And like for many people, or at least like in like our collective consciousness. And you know, and yeah, so I don't know, there's something about like spaciousness, because like we've been talking about, we can't actually hear, and we can't actually be with ourselves, and we don't actually even know. Like most yoga classes now here in the US have music playing during them. And that was never the yoga practice that really started to change things for me. It was breath only. And part of that was because when you play music, it changes people align how they're feeling with the song that's playing. The song that's playing evokes something in them. So how on earth are we going to know what we're feeling and what's going on inside if everything is constantly stimulating us and shifting how we're feeling on the inside?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I mean, I'm sure there's more I could probably come up with, but I think like mystery and spaciousness, belonging too. I mean, that's definitely deeply interwoven there. Um, that's that innate wholeness that you were talking about earlier. And that sort of that innate sense of like, it's not, I think, therefore I am. It's, I am and I belong. And there's no like, therefore. There's just like, it's like, I'm here, aren't I? And so that has to count for something, you know, otherwise, why be here?
Mhm.
And so I think but it's like, but we don't know how to trust that. And we were talking earlier again about sort of the brain and sort of that false statement that the thoughts, thoughts create our reality, right? And I feel like that's like a yes and statement, right? In that, you know, it's actually our perceptions that create, or our thoughts create how we perceive our reality. But we have to believe in something bigger than us in order to have the container, in order to have the spaciousness, in order to have the sense of wholeness and the sense of belonging that allows us to kind of like, in somatic work and nervous system work, you talk about interoception and proprioception or exteroception, right? And so it's like important for us to tune inward and then also tune outward. Like as animals, we're constantly check in, check out, check in, check out. What's happening internally, what's happening externally, what's happening, and so I think we have to have this sense of something larger than us so that we can get like true readings actually, and we can calibrate and we can find, you were talking about your own inner alignment earlier and finding that. And we can't find that if we're a complete island, because then we're just like a tornado and, like spinning around with no sense of any kind of orientation, up, down, right, left, front, back, and we just don't know. But if we're have some sense of something larger than us, then it's like, then we have something to kind of bounce off of, or to like orient ourselves in relationship with.
Yeah.
And I think that's why belonging. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like I started on one thread based on your question and then kind of went some other places, but I'll turn it back over to you.
No, I think, it's true, right? Like what's happening with, how are we able to connect to ourselves and the part of us that is that part of us that we trust.
Mm.
And I'm going to be offering a women's group on self-love. And one of the things that we talk about is self-love as the way that we relate to ourselves in any given situation.
Mm.
And then what's like not self-love? And part of that, I think, is what you're speaking to. What are all of the distractions, the way that we distract away from ourselves? And I actually think it is normalized to feel, quite distracted. And not that that's bad. In a way, it can be a survival mechanism of like, whatever I'm experiencing right now is just too much. So therefore, I'm going to pop on, a screen really quickly. And I think that people are craving a deeper sense of belonging, and also craving a sense of like deeply knowing themselves and trusting themselves, and also deeply trusting and knowing others. Like, can I, we were talking about, you've mentioned spaciousness. And I think for me, if I want to move into space inside of myself, like if I want to be in the quiet, or if I want to just feel my body there, it's in a way, it's like creating a sense of safety, but also like I have to have a certain amount of capacity and safety in my body in order to want to feel and to feel. So I think people are really seeking an inner, wanting to feel safe inside of themselves and also safe in the world. And what that looks like for everyone is different. Some of these over normalized versions of what success is like working and, many kind of what we consider normal, like busyness and, TV and drinking and all of our habits. Again, not that they're bad, but some of them really are defense mechanisms keeping us from feeling and being. And at the end of the day, I think what people really deeply crave is to know that they're a part of something bigger than themselves, that they trust. And also to know that they have that sense of belonging, that sense of whatever it is for people, community, family, purpose, meaning. And I think especially right now, it's quite challenging because all of what we know is being uprooted. So our current sense of what has been familial structures, so many structures are being uprooted, or even like, what does community look like? And I think all of this, what we've known, or, what our ancestors have known, what our parents have known. I grew up in a small farm town where like 30 years later, when my stepdad passed away, my neighbors that I had known as a kid were there, like helping when my mom couldn't lift him up anymore. I mean, that for me, like, that's how I grew up with what community feels like.
Yeah.
So to come out in this like bigger world and to have to create, or moving to Spain and having such an incredibly deep sense of belonging in this place that I wasn't even born in, that I didn't even speak the native language initially. Like, it's not my native language. I speak
Mm-hmm.
Spanish, and then feeling this sense of, kinship. And, um, I'll never remember when I was living in Spain and my boyfriend passed away when I was there, and his mom like grabbed hold of me. She took my elbow at the funeral and was like, "You're with us from now on." Like, they were clear, like, you're with us. Where that meant like you're not falling through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when does your flight get in? We're picking you up from the airport. I'm on all the family trips. It was never a question of if I would have a place to stay or not. Like, in the summers when my, rent would be up because they would want to renovate or whatever, the rules are there. And it would be like, I would have 4 people open their homes. Like, do you need a place to stay? You just let us know. And so to me, there's not that Spain is perfect or not that any culture is perfect, but I think on like a really primal level, we're being asked to rewire
Mm-hmm.
all of the unhealthy
Mm-hmm.
patterns. And really, we're being asked to evolve, and
Mm-hmm.
we're being asked to say, these patterns of guilt or shame or, whatever they are, and they run through us because we're human. Like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's exempt from this human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it's bad, it's normal. It's how do
Mm-hmm.
we work with it, and how do we work with it inside of ourselves. But we're being asked to both evolve like at a really fast rate, and also create new structures. Like, say I want to evolve beyond my family, that might mean for some people that I'm not going to be in touch with my family for a time, or because
Mm-hmm.
if those aren't healthy relationships, and that can be very challenging. Not that that's the case for everybody, but we're really being asked to evolve in like really quick ways
Mm-hmm.
that, the nervous system isn't necessarily designed for up until now, but also create new structures that feel more in alignment with who we are now as a species and
Mm-hmm.
what we know now. And my just hope and prayer is that it's graceful, and that
Mm-hmm.
all of this incredible wisdom in these incredible modalities, which they're all different, and every culture has a different medicine and a different wisdom. And my hope and prayer is that it's graceful, or, the prayers for grace, right? And ease. Um, and that everybody finds their own medicine, whatever that is for them. Because it's not that one is necessarily better than another. Some might be, I think, more holistic. And I think when we start to talk about wisdom truths, they all align. All of the great wisdom truths and traditions, if it's a truth, it will say the same thing, just in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think, or a different element of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we're like really in big spaces right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm aware of our time and yeah, but just want to invite maybe a last piece to kind of close out this thread that you were just sort of saying there. What does alignment feel like in your body? Like when you're in the presence of a big truth, and I know that's a really big question, but maybe just in this moment, what kind of comes to you as like, what is, because there's also been times where collectively everybody's agreed on something that then once we've evolved, we look back and we're like, oh, how did we all somehow agree that that was okay? And like, and even in those moments, there were always people who were like, this isn't okay. Right. But like, but yeah. So how do we kind of tease apart like the collective
Mm-hmm.
misvisions from collective visions? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Like, what does that feel like in your body? The difference between those
I love that question.
for
And
you?
I love that you named, like, yeah, at some point in time, the collective agreed that, racism was okay, or
Mm-hmm.
that, women shouldn't vote, or like all of these things. And to me, it speaks to like the idea of animism again, that we're each, we're all alive and we all have our own individual truths. To me, in my body, when I feel truth, I do feel space in my body.
Mm.
I feel a settling in my system. I feel a lot of times I'll feel like a spiritual energy, like a light, or a light kind of, it'll kind of feel like I'm um if it's my ego, maybe it feels a little bit more like grasping or forcing or clinging, or just kind of mentalizing.
Mhm.
And then if I'm aligning to truth, whether that's through another person or through, nature or practice, to me, there's a settling and an opening.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love that, the settling and the opening.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's there's like there's like the decisions we make when we're afraid, and
Yeah.
those usually contract us in some way or put something up between us and the rest of the world. And then there's like the decisions we make when we're grounded, settled, in belonging, in alignment, and those feel like, even when they're creating healthy boundaries, they're creating healthy boundaries so that we can stay open,
Yeah.
not so that we're like closing. Yeah. Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah, was there
I
something? Yeah.
often, yeah, when people are in a kind of, I don't know what to do type of space, or like where do I go from here? Um, I often invite people into processes that are like assisting them in getting connected to that
Mhm.
stillness. Because
Mhm.
usually when our answers come that feel like the right thing to do for me, it feels like a stillness as
Mhm.
opposed to maybe like a confusion.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there's that Shel Silverstein poem, "There is a voice inside of me that whispers all day long. I know that this is right for me. I see that this is wrong. No
Mhm.
teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can decide what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside."
Mhm.
And I just love it because it like speaks to that each person and each living being, like we all have that inner intelligence.
Mhm.
And any modality or teacher or anything that we do is hopefully helping us get closer to our inner wisdom and how that inner wisdom lives in each of us.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I love that question of how do we feel that truth in our bodies, or how do we feel our own inner wisdom inside of us? Like, what does that feel like?
Mhm.
It's a great question.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks for exploring it with me. So, yeah, so as I said, I'm aware of our time and your time, and um so how can people find you if they want to be in touch?
Well, my website is my name, KristinUrbanus.com, KristinUrbanus. And I work with people on an individual one-to-one basis, doing spiritual psychology and somatic work. And then I also am hosting a women's group called the Art of Radical Self-Love, starting
Mm.
March 13th,
Mm.
co-hosting it. And so all the information is there. My Instagram is Life Coach Yoga, and we're calling it the Art of Radical Self Love because everything we're talking about kind of today, it's like um, showing up and being with ourselves in a loving or neutral way is radical in comparison to how we've been taught to be with ourselves.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's beginning for anyone who resonates with
Mm.
um, who identifies as being female.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I'll have those all in the show notes too, then, for everybody. And yeah.
Thank you.
Hmm. So we'll take a moment here to just take a deep breath in and out together, acknowledging from our hearts the fire, the conversation, the wisdom in each of us that is unique to each of us, and yet somehow, when shared, becomes greater than any one of us. Acknowledging again the land, the council of all beings, all presences, all life. And so, whatever landed for you from this conversation, trust that it landed in your body, in your nervous system, in that spacious pool inside of you, where maybe it becomes a seed and something starts to germinate. And so, with thank you, yeah, feel free to share the episode if it landed, and subscribe or rate wherever you listen. You can get in touch with me. You can get in touch with Kristin. And yeah, we'll see you around the fire next time. So thank you, everyone.